Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could be here. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. Sign up for the newsletter. See the great guests we have on the program. And I have a great guest coming on today. I have author and filmmaker Trevor Loudon coming on. He's going to be discussing a new documentary film, Beneath the Sheep's Clothing, as well as a new book, Marxist Infiltration of the West. Book is called Comrade. I'm going to have links up at the PAS Report website, so you're going to want to make sure you check it out. Trevor, welcome to the program. How are you today?
Hey, thanks very much, Nick. Thanks for having me on, and greetings to all the viewers.
Well, I'm happy you could be here. You're someone that has been on the front lines warning about the Marxist infiltration that we've been witnessing in the West. And you've studied communism. You understand the tactics that are used, particularly in different regions of the country. So for you, what is the most striking historical pattern that you see going on in the West and the United States right now today, and the techniques that they're using to push this infiltration?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing, most of the Western nations are in the midst of a communist revolution. And I say United States, Canada, Australia, Britain, France, Germany, they're all in some stage of a communist revolution. Now, that's completely contrary to what you would see on the media. But what I'm seeing is there's a massive infiltration of the government of those countries, and the same woke Marxist policies, educational policies, foreign policy, the mainly education, the corruption of media, the takedown of media. All of these are, and the use of racial politics and gender politics are all endemic in the Western nations. And this is Marxism. This is the modern form of a Marxist revolution. You know, we think of communism as, the workers rising up and taking the wealth, the bosses, and that's the old school. Now it's gender politics. Now it's transgender politics. Now it's woke politics. Now it's Black Lives Matter and refugee resettlement and all of this kind of thing. Woke, big tech, etc. So we're in a revolution, and I thank God for President Trump that at least we've got a chance of pushing it back now.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I want to ask you, when did this switch occur? Because you're right. If we look at Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto, it speaks about the workers' rebellion against the elite and blah, blah, blah. And today it's more cultural Marxism that we're witnessing. Why did the whole idea of the workers' rebellion fail in the West, and then they gravitated towards this idea of cultural Marxism?
Yeah, well, it really failed in the early 20s. They had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And so they were all expecting a revolution in Hungary and a revolution in Germany and Denmark. And there were some communist takeovers, but they were all thrown off because the workers did not support them. The workers were happy to make money and be patriotic Germans or Italians or whatever they were. And so the communists had to do a rethink starting in the 20s. And that's when they brought in Gramsci, when they could start to work on change the culture before you change the people. And then in the 60s, it was Maoism. And Chairman Mao was really all about racial minorities and gender minorities. So you've seen since the 60s onwards, most of the communist revolution in America, for instance, has been race-focused. Black Lives Matter, Black Panther Party, reparations for Japanese Americans, the La Raza movement returning the southern states to Mexico. All of this is communist, but it's not the traditional old-fashioned communist, so people don't recognize it for what it is.
Well, I think that's important. So when we look at, let's say, the subversion of the education system, it's not like they're saying, hey, this is communism, this is wonderful, and you should support it. Instead, they're using all these different issues to push Marxist ideology. And it's funny because you see, they're like useful idiots, right? They'll parrot the Marxist ideology. Yet, if you ask them to define communism or Marxism, they couldn't define it for you. And that's the amazing part. That there's so many people that don't believe they're communist, yet they'll push communist ideology. What do you think has happened within the education system where we don't see the ability to think critically anymore? We just see people just being told that they need to be activists, and then you see a bunch of people going out there and doing the bidding.
Well, that's right. The education, the classic education where you learn geography and math and science and history and civics, that was to make you an educated voter, an educated citizen who could understand the difference between tyranny and freedom and make the right decisions. You know, so there's been a long-term process in the education system that really went crazy when they introduced the Department of Education in the 60s. And we got to push Trump to abolish the Department of Education, one of his first things. So what they've done is distorted history. So America's not a great country anymore. This fantastic constitution that set people free. Now America's all about rich white slave owners who ripped off the third world. We don't hear about the kids don't learn about civics. They don't learn even true geography or true history. So they've got no roots. They've got no historical roots to draw on. So they can't evaluate one system from another. So when somebody comes along wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt or a Bernie Sanders t-shirt and says, let's have socialism, it's all the freedom and all the prosperity we have now, plus free stuff. Well, what do you think? They're going to go for it, right? They don't know. They don't know about the Berlin Wall. They don't know about the mass slaughter under Mao and Pol Pot and Vladimir Lenin. They don't know that. So they're easy meat. You know, if you're a con man and you want to rip people off, first just disorientate people. You get them into a false reality, and then you feed them your reality.
And that's essentially what they're doing. I mean, they've redefined what truth is when we see this whole idea, the
Yeah.
ludicrous idea of my truth, which is a bunch of nonsense because there's only one truth. And it doesn't depend on whether we accept it or not to give it its binding force of validity. Truth is truth. It's going to exist whether we accept it or reject it. And in the education system, we see these failures, but it's not just the United States. We see it throughout Western civilization where you have tons, scores of the next generation being taught to despise the country that they come from. Can
Well,
any civilization survive that unabated?
no, you can't. And this is in my home country, New Zealand. This is in Canada. This is in Britain. The kids are taught to hate their own society, not respect their history, not understand their history. So they're easy meat for any ideology that comes along. You know, Hitler famously said this, give me a kid till they're 7 and I have them for life. You know, so this is where we're at right now. I think in when Trump won in 2016, if only 18 to 23-year-olds had been allowed to vote in that election, Trump would have won 3 states.
Wow,
So,
that's
you
scary.
know, that's and of course the kids are turning more conservative thanks to Turning Point USA and Dennis Prager and a lot of other things. Yes, it isn't quite that gloomy, but the point is every generation of kids is less connected to America and less understanding of their history. So they're more susceptible to brainwashing. And that is why we got this 4 years under Trump to start reversing that. If we don't reverse that, we can kiss this country goodbye.
Yeah, well, we have to be honest because it's not just the young people. If the older people, the parents don't know much about America, it's not like they could teach what the schools aren't teaching. So it's even deeper than that. But in Beneath the Sheep's Clothing, you go even further because it's not just the educational institutions, it's also our religious institutions as well. Can you explain that to the audience?
Yeah, Beneath Sheep's Clothing is a project. It's a fantastic movie. I'm in it. James Lindsay's in it. Many other quite well-known people are in it. But it's what it's see, Julie Beerling was a missionary in Russia after the collapse of communism, and she studied how the communists suppressed people, took control, maintained control. And when she come back to America, she started to see the same techniques being used against the religious minorities in this country. And the target is they go after the religious minorities, but the target is all Christians. They go after the extreme versions and then they tar everybody with that brush. And so she made this movie, which is connecting all the dots. Because as I said, Nick, we see the transgender movement, we see the open borders movement, we see woke Hollywood and woke sport and woke big tech, and we see the degradation of the military and Marines walking around in high heels, and we see these as crazy stuff, but we don't see it as a connected program to weaken and destroy America to impose world communism. If we saw it connected, we'd have a lot of aha moments. And so the movie is really about connecting the dots so we can start to see this as an organized whole. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Julie's done a fantastic job putting this together. It should be in every stocking this Christmas. Every
Absolutely.
America should have this because it's you gotta know what you're fighting for, because we're going to be fighting for the next 4 years to make sure we aren't back to square one in 2026.
And I think
We're going to
that's
be
so
fighting, and we
important.
need to understand the why we fight, how to fight, and the movie does that.
And I want to talk about that in a minute. When we look at the aspect of religion, I'm a Roman Catholic, and we see that the Catholic faith has actually been usurped by a lot of Marxist ideology, right? It used to be that to Roman Catholics, Christianity was we take care of the poor out of our own free will. We help people out of our own free will. But yet we have a pope now that goes around dictating that governments must do these things. Doesn't that go against the very institution of Christianity as a whole?
That's the whole point. There's a world of difference between voluntary Christian giving and force giving, voluntary Christian giving to people you want to support or want to believe in, to being forced to cough up your tax money to give to people you don't know and don't support. One is virtuous and good, and one is evil. And Pope Francis, who actually works with high-level former East German communist royalty like Michael Brie, works with these people on a regular basis. Pope Francis is putting forward the socialist view, which is not surprising considering he couldn't wait when he was a young priest in Argentina for the Communist Party newspaper to be delivered to his office every week, or when he used to hide Marxist literature from the government authorities for his communist friends. That it's sad because I'm not Roman Catholic, but a lot of my family are, and I'm just horrified at good, faithful Roman Catholics who hate communism, and they've got a communist pope. What the heck do you do?
Well, it's
It ain't
interesting. As
easy.
the Pope is communist, we see Catholicism here in the United States actually getting more traditional, where it's
Yes.
becoming more conservative. So there's a large rejection of what's coming out of the Vatican.
Yeah, look, and that's true. I see that amongst my friends and family. I see that, but the Pope is now stacking the College of Cardinals with more people just like him to make sure the next Pope is a communist as well. So you could see an ever increasingly conservative church with another communist Pope. So how does that work out? This not a healthy situation for the church, unfortunately.
No, certainly not. Now, for the average individual out there, because let's face it, it takes the people to put a stop to this, where
Oh,
the
and
people.
just yeah. Sorry, Nick. By the way, we talked about how the Soviets used to use marginalized people, and they'd pick on certain marginalized people, then use that to suppress the whole. Well, conservative Catholics are now a target. The FBI is putting conservative Catholics as a list on the list of people to be watched. Now that has to stop under Trump straight away. But that's the point I'm making. Conservative Catholics, so traditional Catholics who just believe what Catholics always believed, are now being marginalized because they are a danger to the existing status quo. That's the point
Absolutely.
that Julie will draw in the movie.
And I spoke about it a number of times on my podcast. The FBI Richmond memo was one of the most disgraceful things I've ever witnessed, targeting Roman Catholics because they believe in two genders. They're pro-life, and
What?
they don't want the government dictating when, where, and how we practice our faith. And it actually, the war on Catholics and Christians in general goes deeper under this administration. We've seen 70% of Catholic and Christian colleges get investigated and fined by the Department of Education, yet they only serve 10% of the population. So that doesn't make any sense where
Oh,
you have.
they are persecuted way out of proportion. For any minor infraction, there's massive fines, but a public school or a left-wing school yeah, there is a definite program of persecution against the Catholic churches. The more conservative, the more they get persecuted.
And it's because they don't toe the left-wing narrative. And that's why people need to wake up. And that's what the documentary does. It tries to wake people up. So for the average individual, what are the things they need to be on the lookout, particularly when it comes to their kids and how they might be influenced by Marxist ideology? What do they need to pay attention to? Because too many Americans, far too many, have had their heads buried in the sand for 2 decades.
Well, I think one of the good things that COVID did was finally force a lot of Americans to read their kids' school textbooks and to sit in on their Zoom sessions and were horrified. Look, I had a son in a public high school in Florida, a very conservative area, and I would read his textbooks, and they were all Marxist. It's all about the geography books were all about global warming. The science books were all about global warming. The history books were all about but what a bunch of scumbags the founding fathers were. They'd have a whole section of the religious books, whole section on Islam, about 9 pages. The Christian section was one paragraph about how white Catholics came to America and enslaved and slaughtered the natives. That was the Christian section. So you got to look. Another friend of mine who helped do the movie Enemies Within the Church with me put his girl in a Christian school to get her out of the public school. The first day she comes back doing a history project on Cesar Chavez, the Marxist Union leader. So you got to look at the history books, you got to look at your science books, you got to look at your religious instruction, and you got to do massive due diligence. Because why would you pay thousands of dollars a year to indoctrinate your kid in anti-Christian Marxism? Send them to a public school, do it for free, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That,
so yeah, but that's the first thing you got to do. You got to look at the instruction. What is being instructed? What are the textbooks? And if you find they are unsatisfactory and you go to the school and they'll do nothing about it, take your kid out of that school straight away. Your child's education, your future relationship with your child is worth having to take the child an extra 5 miles every day to go to school.
a
You know,
hundred percent.
you gotta find the right school. There are some left, or you get into a homeschool co-op, your little cooperative of, some 10 parent groups of parents might get together and hire a teacher to teach math, and the parents all chip in. That's another good option. But if you cannot find a good Christian school, Catholic or Protestant, that is teaching traditional stuff, real math, real science, don't waste your money, don't waste your time. Get into homeschooling, homeschool co-op, or find another school. Your kid is too important. You got to do your diligence here.
And Trevor, I have to say, with that, I think that's so important what you're saying. But at the same time, my only slight disagreement with you is I could provide my child with the best education in the entire world, and he could be smarter than everyone else. But if the vast majority of the public is going through a public education system and
Yeah,
getting the
yeah.
brainwashing and everything collapses, what good is that education I gave my
And
child?
I take the point. Trump has promised to abolish the Department of Education. That would be a very good first step. So education comes back to the state level, so parents can get more control and more control over curriculum. Look, we had a relatively good public school system for 200 years in America that taught real math, real science, real history, real English. I would prefer to get the government completely out of education. But if we're going to have a public education system, get rid of the Department of Education, return education to the state level, and let parents take control of the textbook provision and the curriculums. And that would be a big step in the right direction. Because if we lose our kids, nothing else matters in the end.
Yeah, and we have to get rid of all the ideological zealots in the classroom. I mean, there's far too many that look at ideology because they're not experts on the subject material. See, before like this whole idea of an education degree, the teachers were trained in their discipline. If they were teaching math, that's what they were trained in, or history. Now they're trained in quote unquote education. And so that's where we see a lot of them replacing the subject material with their own ideology.
Yeah, look, 100%. That's their fallback position. But I'll tell you another thing too. FDR hated the idea of government unions. FDR, because he understood what a corrupt thing they would be. They just form a merry-go-round with the Democratic Party. We have to take down the teachers' unions. The teachers' unions have to be taken out of schools. Teachers' unions are the biggest child molesters in the country. They're all controlled by communists. They dictate curriculum. They dictate to principals what they should teach. They dictate who gets hired and fired. Unless we're serious about doing that, we're not serious about fully restoring education. That is why if you cannot get a good public school, at least for your kids, a homeschool co-op or homeschooling is the way to go. But I take your point. That still leaves 90% of American kids getting brainwashed, and they're still going to be voting, and they're still going to wreck our country.
Yeah, and the American people should wake up. Like, Randy Weingarten, teachers union boss, caused more harm to students' education than anyone else throughout the coronavirus by advocating the
Oh,
schools stay shut down. And so when we look at it,
100%.
how can conservatives build alliances with other groups that may, agree or have sympathies? I mean, right now we're seeing this weird alliance between conservatives and the old school liberal types when it comes to government abuses. How can we build on that?
See that in healthcare, with people like RFK and Naomi Wolf and others, sort of old school liberals who are just shocked at the result of what happens when you allow government to take over your healthcare. And so, yeah, homeschool schooling is another. A lot of liberal soccer moms. They might be really liberal on abortion and social issues, but they hate the education their kids are getting. You can make common ground with those people, and that's happening all over the country. You can make common cause with liberals on certain issues, health being a big one, education being another. In certain parts of the country, even guns would be another. There's a lot of Democrats who love their guns in certain states. So yeah, as long as you walk in it with your eyes open and know what you're doing, I'm all about building alliances where you can. And especially I would say with Black Democrats and education, they value education more than anything. They don't like perverts in their schools. They might vote Democrat, a lot of them, but they are very socially conservative. And so what I see, social conservatism is the biggest common philosophy in America. People might disagree on economics and the level of government handouts, but most people want good schools, strong national defense, low crime, honest law enforcement, protection of religion, good sexual morality, good general morality. 80% of Americans agree on those things. So if we focus on the social conservative values, we can make common ground with just about anybody. A lot of Bernie Sanders people are social conservatives. They may
It's
be crazy on economics, but and then this is why I fault the Republicans. Republicans have tried, the leadership has tried to avoid social conservative issues. They tried to focus just on the money, the regulations, the taxes. That's 20% of the population cares about that. 80% cares about social conservative issues. The black community is more socially conservative than the white community. The Latino community is more socially conservative, more anti-abortion, more pro-family than many of the white population. The Asian Americans are very socially conservative, especially sexual morality, especially education. Look, I got an Uber in Sacramento the other day, and I had a Somali driver. The first thing he said to me, not how's the weather, nice day. He said, what do you think of this transgender stuff in schools? Because he's got 2 little girls just about to start school. He cares about that stuff. He doesn't want the perverts, messing with his kids' minds. There's a lot of opportunity for common ground on the social conservative issues, especially education and health.
And didn't the recent election kind of show that, where Trump improved the margins amongst blacks, amongst Hispanics,
Absolutely.
amongst Asians, amongst younger Americans, almost every single demographic? Does that leave you hopeful for the future?
Oh, look, absolutely. That Trump is realigning politics because he's making the Republican Party more populist and more social conservative. And that is the majority of the American people. This is no longer a Chamber of Commerce party that just wants lower taxes and deregulation and tons of illegal immigrants coming across the border for cheap labor. They have been marginalized now, as they should be. I'm all about lower taxes. I'm all about deregulation, absolutely. But it's the social conservative issues that stir people's hearts. People do not march on the state capitol to cut the gas tax 2%, but they will march for their schools. They will march for their veterans and their guns and their borders and their churches. They will march for those things. They will march for their children. And that's where Trump is taking the GOP, and that is a very healthy direction to go in.
It certainly is. And that's why everyone needs to check out Beneath the Sheep's Clothing. We have to push back against the Marxist infiltration of the West. You need to check out Trevor's new book, Comrade. Trevor, thanks so much for joining me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, look, thanks. They get the movie Beneath Sheep's Clothing .movie. That's the place. But real pleasure, Nick. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Always. And we're going to have links up at the PAS Report, PASreport.com, to the book and the movie. Everyone needs to check it out.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.